to work. San Diego is so much more than sunshine, beaches, tacos, and freeways. We're home to a fierce, growing, binational community of people who walk, bike, and love transit. The fact that you all are here tonight proves something important. The movement to free ourselves from the tyranny of the automobile, as Sarah and Doug so eloquently put it, is alive, growing, and impossible to ignore. You all, and many more like you, are a whole cadre of car-free and car-light neighbors in San Diego. We all insist, streets are for people. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, my brilliant friend, collaborator, and fellow executive director, Anar Salayan of Bike SD.
Chloe said everything I was going to say. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you the reason that we're all here. You know them. You love them. Give it up for the War on Cars!
How's it going? Switch over to presentation.
Hello. Yes.
How's everyone doing? All right, while we get the presentation set up, let's ask really quickly, we're going to ask how you got here. So we're going to start with the simplest. Who walked? Who's close enough that they walked?
Okay.
Right.
Nice.
Who biked? Very good. Who took some form of transit? Okay. Who drove? Okay, get out.
Okay.
No, it's okay. You're just working with the
There's no shaming.
No, this is what we're trying to fix. You had no choice. We're really excited to be here. Thank you to the Bicycle Coalition Bike SD for having us. We spoke with our friend Ray Callahan, City Nerd in Seattle and Portland, and he said, get ready because San Diego has some of the best activists in the country. He was really impressed, and so, and we've been really impressed so far too, so it's really great to be here.
Yeah, it's really, it's like, some people said to us before we got here, people in Portland were like, going to San Diego? And I was like, hell yes, we're going to San Diego. Who needs it more than San Diego?
All right, so we're bringing our back out in a little bit, but we've got a little presentation to do. We're really excited to talk to him. Yeah, you're just lucky to have such great leadership among the advocacy organizations, so it's really cool. Yeah, so you might have noticed that we have moved for the book away from the slightly or very confrontational war on cars language to the slightly less confrontational life after cars.
But that, I mean, first of all, the war on cars is not going anywhere. It's always going to be the war on cars. So, you know, that title was always intended as a provocation and also a reappropriation of what the motor lobby says that any bike lane is a war on cars, right? So, but we wanted the title of the book to be a little bit more of an invitation as well as a provocation, and we tried to write a book that would not only give people who are in the movement information that they didn't have, and also sort of a structured approach and the support and the validation that is so important when you're doing something that a lot of people in the society think is weird and marginal. So, you know, but we also want this to be a book that you could hand to that smart person in your family or a friend who, you know, might be curious about what is this car-free thing that you're trying to do, what is this car light thing you're trying to do, and that it would be approachable for them. So yeah, so Life After Cars, it's an invitation to imagine somebody here I ran into on the street, and on the way I was walking around for the show, and he said, "It's such a nice neighborhood, isn't it? Just imagine what it would be like without cars." And I was like, yes, okay, let's imagine that.
We do have a book that we want to talk about. We were going to get to that. But before we do that, we want to really talk about what we have seen in San Diego while we have been here. Since we got here on Friday and up until the moment that we started this show, we've seen quite a lot in a short amount of time.
So we know.
We feel confident that we can tell you everything there is to know about what's working in your city, what isn't quite working, and what really isn't working in your city. So let's get going. Two of the things we think San Diego really has going for it. I mean, yeah, so I walked around the Hillcrest neighborhood, I walked around downtown, and this is really some excellent bike infrastructure, built out in concrete in spots. I know there's some painted bike lanes still that are in the process, and I know there's some bike lanes that are being ripped out as well, but this stuff is really high quality, and you should be really proud of the effort that it took to get those things, and the elected officials who supported getting those things. I was really impressed to see it.
We're not allowed to have concrete protection for bike lanes in New York City for some reason.
Concrete is a technology far beyond the capacity of New York City DOT. I don't know.
It's too advanced for us.
This was just a really good stuff. The two-way protected bike lane downtown that I saw, just really beautiful, nice stuff painted through the intersection. Really impressive. So nice work. Thank you. This was just, if you see these stickers around, I put them everywhere. Really good, I mean, even in the places where it is just plastic, the drivers are mostly, obeying them. I did see some blocked bike lanes here and there, but it's the United States, what are you gonna do?
Okay, I took these, I was trying to go to that store, after dark, and it seemed like the most perilous thing. And then as I was trying to cross the intersection that didn't have any signalization whatsoever, this is the corner of Cass and Hornglen, and it's then I saw that cute little logo. Oh, it's so cute as a surfboard.
You'll die a cute death. Yeah.
That was very disappointing. I was kind of sad about that.
Some other stuff. Really creative micromobility. I didn't take any with actual surfboards on it. We're staying by Pacific Beach. But, people get creative when they're given the opportunity, which I think is a really good and healthy sign that people want more stuff. This person, these people, could be your fellow advocates. Maybe they don't know that they should be advocates. So, they'll recruit more surfers, I think, into the bike movement. But then, of course, this kind of thing downtown. I mean, technically, that's mass transit, right? The safest form of drinking and driving there is. And then stuff like this, that's actually kind of cool. We saw a lot of these everywhere, golf cart style, not even just for surfboard carrying and all that kind of stuff, but we should want more drivers and things like that, especially if they're older or just have anxiety about driving a big SUV.
Yeah, really. I always say, when people are like, do you believe in EVs? I'm like, well, yeah, but V stands for vehicle, not car. So, you can have EVs that are not, F-150, trucks or whatever. Anyway, so yeah.
Negative 150. Unfortunately, I did go out for a run. You got toxic. I'm calling it macro mobility. I've never seen, honestly, outside of Texas, more lifted trucks than in this city. I'm sorry, there are a lot.
There's not a lot of mud. I mean, I know it was raining, but
we took the bus, we took the trolley, technically a streetcar. I know Ray talked about that a little bit, and it was great. We're really impressed. Got us from...
we went all over the place on these things, and I had a really the bus driver was really helpful to me. At one point, I was about to get on a bus that was not the best choice. He was like, "Why didn't you use Google Maps? You shouldn't use Google Maps." I'm like, I don't know. I'm just trying to get around. Anyway, but he put me on the right bus, and so I was very impressed by that.
Very bad freaking times. We're supposed to get from our hotel to here. It would have taken an hour 30 on transit, cycling an hour 16, but 18 minutes driving. So we need to reverse a lot of that,
Yeah.
right?
It could be.
Invite more friction into the driving experience and make them as, inconvenient as taking the transit, and then make them convenient. Yeah. That's an indicator species of a sort. You saw a bunch of these, Sarah, yeah?
Oh my God, they're all over the place.
This was the bus stop across from the bus stop that we got on.
Right. Which incidentally, why is there no shelter? There was a shelter on the side of the street that we were, and I know that sometimes this happens that people, especially it's very sunny or super hot, that people will wait where a shelter is and then run to get the bus across the street, and maybe that's like it's luring them over there.
It's one-stop shopping.
Yeah, exactly. Not good.
Yeah, downtown, still way too many surface parking lots. If you can parking decks, I think, there just should be, I haven't been here in a long time, but there is a lot more housing downtown, which is great. There should just be more and more stuff that people need, and you don't need so much paid parking. I did put a more sticker there, just to, like I said.
Let's read it.
Yeah. So we were with
Tragic.
Yeah, we were with Andrew Bowen at Freeway Exit.
What's terrible about this that you can't see in the picture is the noise. And here you are in this stunning park filled with these beautiful museums and architectural gems and the zoo and blah, blah, blah. And there's just this like that horrible sound all the time, and it's just and because it's at the bottom of a ravine, it's even like more amplified, and it's an abomination that should not be there. It has to go at some point.
Yeah, as much as we saw good pedestrian infrastructure downtown and in neighborhoods like this, there is a lot of this stuff. Sum it all up in one picture.
Yeah, it's like I sort of said, I said at one point, like, it's the collision of good intentions and bad habits. That's kind of what I feel about San Diego. And here was all this, there was a bike lane, that bike lane was super sketchy. I was leaving Balboa Park and going toward the City College Blue Line station, and really, it was really scary. Like, I was alone, I was walking, I was wearing a brightly colored raincoat because it was raining, so I felt very glad of that, but it just felt like a really dangerous thing to do. And that is, right outside of the park, there's a big high school there, there's the city, it shouldn't be like this.
No.
It's terrifying.
And it's a land of contrast. I think the biggest problem we saw here, maybe the biggest challenge you all have to make this really a truly biking and walking and transit paradise, you guys have absolutely the worst weather. What the hell? We were in Seattle, Portland, and Vancouver and had more nice days than we've had in San Diego.
I did not think I was going to be breaking up my rain pants.
I don't know how you deal with it here. It's always like this, right? Yeah. I was thinking it's really good that they built the Prado building with these overhangs so you don't get wet when you're walking around. That's why they built it that way, I'm assuming? Yeah. So we do want to talk quickly about the book. We're not going to do a reading. Many of you bought the book. Please purchase it if you haven't. But we did want to sort of talk a little bit about what's in it and why. So we start the book in chapter 1 with a story that goes back to Action Comics number 12, which was published in May of 1939. And Action Comics is a comic book featuring Superman, as many of you know. And in this story, Clark Kent comes out of the building where he works, which was called the Daily Star at the time, not the Daily Planet, and he sees that a crowd has gathered and asks what's going on, and finds out that someone, turns out a friend of his, has been hit and killed by a trucker. And this enrages Clark Kent, and he telephones the city's mayor and says, "What are you going to do? We have one of the worst traffic situations in the country. What are you going to do about it?" And the mayor says, "Yeah, I agree it's a problem, but what do you want me to do?" Which should be familiar to lots of advocates
You've
in
probably
this
heard that before.
if you've worked with different mayors over the years. So he puts on the tights and the cape, and he bursts through the walls of a radio station, and he commandeers the airwaves and makes an announcement to the citizens of Metropolis. He says, we have this terrible accident rate. It's more people have been killed needlessly by autos than died during the World War. And he's talking about World War I. It's World War II, not yet begun yet. And he's talking about like mass death, mechanized death on a scale not seen outside of a battlefield in another country. And then he says, and this is not AI, I didn't just call ChatGPT up and say make this, that he declares war on reckless drivers.
Superman was doing it too.
So he then flies out of the radio station and goes to a used car dealership lot where the guy is selling lemons, and he destroys the entire inventory, saying, "I'm going to enjoy this private little war." This is more like vigilante Superman, like Batman, than the Superman that we all know from the James Gunn movie or the Christopher Reeve movies. He then gets hit by what is called then a hit-skip driver, or a hit-and-run driver, and he pretends to be dead, because obviously an automobile cannot kill Superman. He jumps in the backseat of the car and tells the guy, "If you don't cut it out, I will haunt you." It's crazy. Then he goes to an automobile factory and lays waste to the whole thing. Just destroys it from top to bottom, every tool, every piece of equipment, everything.
Because
and nobody can stop him.
He believes in systemic change, Superman.
So then he finds the mayor who is speeding around the city, and he hops in the car and floors it, and the mayor's like, "You're gonna kill us both." And he's like, "Yeah, you mean like you killed the others?" And he's like, "Yeah, the people that you killed, Mr. Mayor, with your hands-off approach to traffic safety. You have blood on your hands, basically." He then flies the mayor up to the window of the city morgue and forces him to look at the maimed bodies of the auto victims. And so the mayor is scared straight. This works, and he vows that he's going to do something about traffic violence, and says he'll now have a zero tolerance policy towards traffic violence, and announces this big crackdown. And in the little coda to the story, Clark Kent is on his way to cover the press conference, and he gets a parking ticket, and he's very happy. So the question is like, well, why did we open the book this way? There's so many ways you could approach the topic of traffic safety and life after cars. So yeah, here's why.
But I think what it shows is that at the time that Siegel and Schuster were creating this, they tackled a lot of the big problems that were happening, because it was a dark time, 1939, kind of like, about dark times here, right? So, but traffic violence was actually one of the top things, like along with, all the stuff that people have been through during the Depression, whatever. But in 1939, this country hit pretty much its peak per capita traffic fatality rate. That 32,386 people, that was when we had a population in this country of about 130 million. And it was, I think, something about 30 per 100,000 deaths. These days, with 39,345, it's about 13, which is still incredibly high, more than twice as much as most other civilized countries, wealthy, developed nations, right? So we have a long way to go, and I do, especially because of the day of remembrance for traffic violence victims, that, I know many of you commemorated that today. And I just want to say, like, the per capita part, it is important to keep track of that, but like each one of these 39,345 people, each one of those is a person. And each one of those, the ripples, as we know, of the suffering and the trauma that of every person's family and work colleagues and friends and acquaintances, and it's just really important. But for Superman and for Schuster and Siegel, that was like such a live issue for them. And so I think it just goes to show, like, that there was a time in this country when we could see traffic violence for the villain that it was, right? He didn't need Lex Luthor. He was just fighting against the real life villain of traffic violence. So let's fast forward a little bit. This is Haight Street in 1967 in San Francisco. Right around this time, the city of San Francisco decided it was going to do a new city plan, and they hired a guy named Donald Appleyard. He was a professor at Berkeley. And what Donald Appleyard did was he said, I want to find out how traffic affects people's social lives. So he found streets that were a high traffic street, a medium traffic street, and a low traffic street. And he and his colleagues went around and they asked questions of people who lived on those streets. They measured the number of cars, and what they found was that the level of traffic very directly impacted the social lives of the people on these streets. People on light traffic streets had three times as many friends locally, and twice as many acquaintances as the people on the heavy traffic street. And the heavy traffic street, lots of people, if they were starting a family, they moved away. They didn't want to start a family on those streets. And so what ended up happening was that a lot of the people who live on the heavy traffic street were older people, many of them women who had been widowed, and were just completely isolated in their apartments and didn't want to go outside, didn't feel safe outside. And this was also a time when, sort of like today, people were being told how terrifying cities were and that they were just filled with crime and, terrible people who were going to destroy your life. But when Appleyard and his colleagues asked people what they were most worried about in their neighborhoods, they didn't answer crime. They answered traffic. And nobody paid any attention to that. But I think it's really important to remember that we've known just how bad this is for our lives. And he was talking about children when he wrote this in his great book, Livable Streets. The social relations that take place on the street, its potential for neighborliness and street life are values of urban life to be treasured. And they are exactly that, but in this country too often, they are destroyed rather than treasured, and they're treated as worthless, and it's all, what's the level of service that we can provide for cars? And so, I think it's really important, and we do look back at a lot of historical stuff in the book, because to me, it's very validating to realize that people have understood this problem and tried to call attention to it at different times. And now it's our turn, right? And that's the work that you all are doing here. And it's great. It's a great thing.
Yeah. Well, let's bring up Anar and we'll start the next part of the program. Yeah, thanks. I'm so lucky to have
Let's get another round of applause, please. Sarah, thank you so much first off for being here and for doing the ongoing hard work that you do at national levels on the national level and educating people that might not know about these things. I mean, we have a room mostly full of advocates that are deep in this work day in and day out, but there's a whole sea of quote unquote normies out there who are not necessarily against any of this work. They just don't know that it's happening. They see it as granted, just what life is. And so the work that you're doing is, I think, going a really long way in sort of shifting the tide across those individuals as well. So thank you for that. For this section, we're going to do a little Q&A. Also, it is hot as hell. Let me break that coffee. Lights. The shirt stays on.
I do notice that like 90% of the men who run in this town don't wear shirts, so I didn't know where this was going.
So for the first question, it's really on political will and courage. And one of the case studies in your book actually is with a fellow Legacy Presents guest that we had last year, John Bowders. Who was here for the John Bowders Legacy Presents? And in the book, he said, when mayors reach out to me, I ask them, what degree of political will do you have? And they say, well, I really want to do it. And I say, are you willing to lose re-election over it? And when you've decided the answer to that question is yes, you will be able to do whatever you want. And so the question is, how do y'all, all the touring you've done, all the people you talk to, how do you see political will showing up or not showing up in American cities today, especially in places like sunny San Diego, where climate goals exist on paper, but yet we see highway expansions, road expansions, parking reform has been this massive headache for everybody, and these things continue to persist. So I'd love to hear about some thoughts on political will in American cities.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to San Diego specifically because I haven't really heard that much about what's going on here in particular. But I will say that I think that inside the city hall, city government, increasingly, generationally, there is a shift happening, and that there are people in power now who get it and who are more receptive to listening to advocates than they used to be. The problem in the United States of America, unfortunately, is a lot of it is at the federal level, and I think that's giving cover to some of the more cowardly politicians, right? Because the federal government right now is clawing back money for transit and bike-ped projects all over the country. It's happening here, it's happening everywhere, and that makes it easier for local officials to say, well, we can't, how are we going to get anything done? We don't have federal funding. So I think that the cities where there's real motivation to make things better, you are seeing, I do think, and I'm just going to bring up the election in New York that happened. Our city that he won that election so resoundingly, but in this context, what moves me most about what he did during the campaign is he had 3 planks in his platform that he just said over and over again: freeze the rent, free childcare, buses fast and free. And I mean, I can't remember the last time that I knew an American politician making the bus a central issue. Bus riders are the most stigmatized, neglected. They have to take the leftovers of everything. And here is somebody who says that is central. Those are the people that I'm going to put at the center of my campaign. I think that's a really great thing. You have a great bus system here, needs to be more frequent, but let's elevate bus riders and make that an example that people are following.
I would also add Katie Wilson in Seattle. She's a transit organizer, and she also made transit and improving transit a big part of her platform. And she won not only on the strength of her own campaigning, but on the organizers and the volunteers, much like Mom Downey did, that he was able to mobilize that generational shift. I think that political courage is obviously the key ingredient. John Waters, he did lose his next election, but he went for a different office. There are so many examples of people who have made bike infrastructure and improving the quality of life central to their politics, and they win over and over again. Anne Hidalgo in Paris, Sadiq Khan in London, Val Plante, even though she chose not to run again this last time, she had been re-elected before in Montreal. And it's a winning political issue, and people should lean into it more. I think what we're seeing in politics is what people want is a person who says what they believe and do their best to deliver on it. They don't want weasels and mealy mouth like, I'm in favor of bike lanes, but we should do 10 miles by 2030, and then if someone calls to complain about parking, a different kind of bike lane. So I think we should lean into forcing our politicians to just tell us what they believe and deliver on it.
Love it. Thank you. At the top of that response, you touched on the uphill battle primarily at sort of the national level, especially now, that a lot of these cities and people who are even in this room, some decision makers that are genuinely willing to do this stuff, yet now have to go through sort of the turbulence that comes from the top down. And so clearly there's this cultural hold on us that is auto-dependency, not only at the national level, but within sort of the zeitgeist and within people's heads. And one of the quotes in your book is that the cultural power of the car is immense. It shapes our laws, our landscape, even our imaginations. You can imagine in movies, for example, 9 out of 10 times you see someone in a car, they're happy, they're excited, they're motivated,
Unless they're John Wick.
Right, they're free. But then on the flip side, you see someone on the bus or the train, and it's always them having the worst day of their lives. Their heart was broken, they lost their job, whatever. So even in the media sort of landscape, we have this narrative at play. So my question is, one, how do we chip away at that cultural hold? And what does a post-car cultural North American identity look like? And how can storytelling or pop culture, including your podcast, play a role in that?
The example I go to is Friends, the TV show. That show is still really popular on streaming. My daughter is 16 and she is watching it. I mean, that show is 30 years old, And part of why it's popular is because it's friends in a city hanging out who live near each other and have the third space of Central Perk, the coffee shop. And they're not glued to phones because smartphones didn't exist when that show came on. But I think part of the popularity of that show is what it shows of urban living at its best. I mean, it's also funny and people love it, but I do think that's part of the appeal. So I think we need more storytelling like that, where, urban living is cool and living in close proximity to friends and family is easy and convenient. And I think we sort of, to my last point, with a podcast, we just try to say what we believe and show it in a positive light. And we need that from storytellers too. Part of the reason we talked about this on the show, that transit users and cyclists are often portrayed as losers or, the bottom rungs of society, is because of where media gets made, and that's in Los Angeles, where having a car in the parking spot at the studio is a status. So we need more people, and that's happening with, YouTube. Ray Delahanty gets more views than the average TV show probably does these days. So I think that's happening. We have to just keep creating our own media channels to go up against these bigger forces.
And absolutely. I do see it percolating through occasionally. There's some ad for something that I refuse to remember what it is, but it's this guy who's riding a bike and he's having a good time, and then he gets on a bus and something good happens to him while he's on a bus, and he's young and handsome, and it was the kind of thing that you wouldn't normally see, but at the level of the movement and the stories that we need to be telling to sort of say, why is this so important? I think one of the exciting things that's happening is the way that this movement is making common cause with the affordable housing movement. Because what we're seeing is, we're in this affordable housing crisis. Everybody understands that. Everybody knows that it's not just housing that's unaffordable, it's everything that's unaffordable. And then you turn around and they're like, oh, and now a new car is going to cost you $50,000. And it's going to be insanely expensive to insure. And people are starting to really rebel against that, I think. People are saying, why should I be paying the equivalent of a small mortgage to own a motor vehicle? And then that's an added expense. And then I have to live all this way far out, and I have to have this terrible car commute. And so I think that the story that we can tell as advocates is, what we want to do is improve your quality of life by saying you don't have to spend all that money. Maybe you do have to have one car in your family, but you don't have to have 2 or 3. You might be able to not live far, far away. And if we make common cause among the affordable housing movement, the climate movement, and the active transportation movement, I think that is a much less siloed way of looking at what it is that we're trying to do. And I interviewed Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo a few weeks ago, and she said, all I'm trying to do is make life better for the people who live in my city. And, that's how she comes at it. It's not, she's not militant about any one form of transportation or any one form of built environment. Every choice she makes is just trying to make life better. And I think that's the story that we need to be telling.
In your answers, you touched on the sort of the appeal to one's wallet and the appeal to their quality of life. And in the book, you have a very strong quote that says, every human aspiration and desire is pushed aside in favor of the car. That's clearly true, and I think people in this room really resonate with that in a real way. I'd love to hear, specifically, what is lost emotionally or socially when a city is designed, or rather bulldozed, for cars instead of people, and how can communities reclaim that sense of connection?
I mean, look at the political moment we're in now. I don't think it's possible. It is possible and has happened in other eras pre-car, but the American version of it, I don't think is possible without the car. It's not an accident that neighborhoods like this, cities in general, are more progressive than rural communities, suburban communities. There are exceptions. Because when you are not in a car all the time, that immigrant who works at the restaurant is your neighbor, is maybe even your friend, right? Because you see them every day. They're not scary. You experience people of different economic classes, different abilities. And so difference becomes an asset that shapes your city and not a thing to be afraid of. And not every interaction you have. I think when we had David Roberts on, who does the Volts podcast, he talked about how when you cruise around in your land yacht and you find a place to moor your land yacht in the sea of parking, almost every interaction you have as you go about your daily business, aside from home and work, is transactional. It is to go to the Target to buy the groceries and the toilet paper, and then to go to the Starbucks to get your coffee, and then to go home. But when you live in a neighborhood that's mixed, you just have just relationships with people. So I think, finding, I'll give a really good example of a way I think in which we can fix a few things. Downtown, the new buildings that are going up, for example, this is my thing that I'm always focused on. When we build these new buildings, what is on the ground floor? Huge retail space. Who can rent that out? chains, big banks, medical offices. What if you took that big space and you changed city law or had a city council person who worked on this and said, we shouldn't allow thousands and thousands of square feet of retail space to take up the first floor. We should have space for, yeah, the one big grocery store, but the key maker, the little coffee shop, the person who just wants to start like a dress business, you know, fashion business, so that there are the walking environment changes, small businesses can start. Those are the little pieces of repair that are like in lines of your zoning code that you could probably find. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, and I just want to say that we were in Vancouver, British Columbia, last week or some point in the recent past, I'm not quite sure. And they had a lot of new development that fit the description that Doug is talking about, and it was very deliberately planned. And, you know, I think that our reliance on the free market to do everything, and our belief in this country that the free market is going to solve every problem in this very organic way is, you know, a real stumbling block. And so I think to the extent that we can get people into office that recognize that this kind of granularity in zoning codes is important, and that it can have, again, and it's really creating a more dynamic downtown environment or neighborhood environment wherever you are. And obviously a lot of American cities are struggling with their downtowns right now. Post-pandemic, it's hard to get people to come back to downtown. So I think it really is something that has to be done with really thoughtful planning, but it also has to be another generational shift, which I do think is happening, to acknowledge that, like, things aren't just going to always happen by themselves, that there has to be some planning and there has to be some involvement in, especially the zoning code. And, you know, zoning and land use obviously are things that people in this room probably think about a lot, and people outside of this room are like, la, 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 I do not care, I do not want to hear about it. So, like, I think that finding creative ways of saying to people, like, hey, you know what zoning is? Zoning means that you could have a coffee shop that you could walk to from your house, or you could have a small store to buy what you need so that you don't have to go to get on the freeway to go to get a gallon of milk. You know, I think that helping to educate, and that's what groups like yours are doing too, I think, is helping to educate about that.
I'm going to go off script a little bit, because what you mentioned, I want to kind of follow a little bit on. It's kind of tangential, but you talk about businesses, and I think a lot of advocates in this room realize that a big opponent in the way of good infrastructure, certainly here in San Diego, for example, here on Adams Avenue, we could have some nice bike lanes, are the businesses and the business districts and the business communities. And it's gotten to a point where, like, a lot of residents kind of parrot those talking points too, because they've heard it once on some random Moby Rag post. Moby Rags. Don't. And they're like, what about the businesses? And they don't, like, you ask them follow-up questions and they don't respond because they don't know what we're talking about. But clearly the businesses are, and, change is hard, certainly for small businesses, right? That is their livelihood at the end of the day. But, like, in your experience and conversations you've had, what are some examples where you've been able to get buy-in from businesses in a very real way that has then driven the momentum forward for real change?
Yeah, the business thing is tricky because I always say that, well, first of all, business owners drive to work. They don't always live in the neighborhoods where their businesses are located, so they have that perspective. It's like, oh, it's so hard for me to find parking, and so that's usually what they're saying when they're saying that their customers can't find parking. There's that. Number two, when you drive to, let's say, a restaurant, and you're late for your reservation, and you say, oh, I would have been on time, but there was nowhere to park, and there was traffic, and blah, 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 blah. And so the managers or the host of the restaurant internalize this idea that all of their customers drive. Meanwhile, if you take transit or you bike, you just walk in, say, hi, I have an 8:15 reservation, and you sit down. And, so maybe we need to complain more of like, oh, I'm 30 seconds late, there was nowhere to lock up my bicycle. You need to say that. So I think that speaks to the idea that you need data. You should do intercept surveys on these corridors and ask people, how did you get here? What businesses are you frequenting? If there's information about how much did you spend, because a lot of times you'll hear business owners say they put the bike lane in, or they're even thinking about putting a bike lane in. My sales revenue went down 10%, and journalists sometimes just parrot that without asking to see books. So I think data is the key. Transportation Alternatives, our big advocacy group in New York, did that in the East Village, and New York is exceptional in some ways, but the business owners were all saying a much larger percentage of my customers drive than the data actually showed. So I think it comes down to, well, obviously we need the good storytelling like we were talking before, but you have to have the data in your back pocket.
And you do have to organize, right? So right now in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, they just put a protected bike lane in on the street that runs near my house, and it's a heavy business street, and I never thought there was going to be a bike lane on this street because the DOT had always said, it's level of service, it just needs, it's a throughput for cars. And so I was stunned when they finally installed this bike lane, and immediately a group of business owners got together to sue the city about it. So it's been kind of tough because these are the businesses I go to all the time, and some of them now have posters in the windows saying, oh, we want bike infrastructure, but not like this, right? So I am going to make a personal project of going into those businesses and saying like, hey, I saw the sign in the window and I'm going to continue shopping here, but I just want you to know that like I really disagree with your position on this because of X, Y, and Z, and this is how I use the street. Right, we trade off good cop, bad cop. But like, the thing is that I think, and Transportation Alternatives has started to organize in the neighborhood so that the silent majority, which I think is in favor of these bike lanes, will be represented. And I think we're talking about maybe doing some creative things. There are a lot of schools on the street that we can maybe organize a ride with kids to get attention for just what kind of safety we're trying to create. There's, I think, like 4 schools in a 10-block, stretch of this street. So, and it's interesting too, because there's a lot of French people who have moved into this neighborhood. It's become this neighborhood that lots of French people like because it's a very nice, like, walkable neighborhood, and they're like, we would like to live somewhere that's more like France than the US, and so I guess they end up there. And my neighbor owns a building that has it's about to open a French daycare, and he was sending me a petition, like, against the bike lane, and next time I see him, I'm going to say, Mike, like all those people that are going to be using this daycare that you're going to be making money off of, they all ride around with their kids on cargo bikes. So you might want to think about that, because actually, so I think that it's a combination of things, but data is important, but organizing is really important because you have to activate the people who do want this infrastructure.
Can I also say, there's also room to just call bullshit on people. I'm sorry. Okay, I don't know what the owner of the ice cream pop place next door thinks about bike lanes or losing parking, but nobody's driving to a store that is not even as wide as a car to shop there. They're just not. The vintage store, all this stuff. Those places will benefit from more foot traffic, and I think you just have to like state that plainly. Like, this was a former streetcar neighborhood. The reason the built form exists in the way that it did is because people hopped off the trolley, the streetcar, and walked from the homes that are back there to get the stuff here. So sometimes there is room in the movement to just be like, I'm not sure that you have a sense of like what's going to make your business thrive. Yeah. Once you get in the car, why am I driving to the hardware store here and trying to find a place to park? I'm going to drive to Lowe's and where it's easy to park.
All right, we have time for, I think, 2 more questions. I want to shift it. So you touched on organizing data as 2 sort of key components of changing hearts and minds. I think another one is like, when people see a cool new park, or when people ride Japan's high-speed rail, they don't think back to, oh, this used to be a parking lot one day, or this was $1 billion boondoggle. Like, nobody thinks about that when they're experiencing these things. They just see how much they enjoy it today. And so I think with that, there really is a role for tactical urbanism. And y'all mentioned that it has the power to pierce the automotive bubble that so frequently surrounds politicians and business owners and residents. And San Diego, we've seen a lot of grassroots urbanism happening recently. Shout out to Strong Town San Diego, where we work with them to do state lighting around neighborhoods. We also have, Parking Day, where a bunch of orgs here take over a parking space, turn into a parklet, and people are pumped about it, and they're curious, they're interested, and they ask questions. And so, like, really showing people what it could be, I think, is another way of sort of changing hearts and minds. I'd love to hear just your take on how DIY actions can shift the Overton window for urban policy, and maybe some good examples.
Yeah, it's the best, because if you think about how change normally happens, the political incentives are all messed up. It's like, come to this meeting at 6:30 in a school auditorium on a Wednesday and scream at each other about the bike lanes. And the only people incentivized to show up are, on one side, the people who have ultimate loss aversion, the people who are going to lose their parking, and the activists, right? The people who are labeled as such or who actually are activists. So if you bring it out into the street, then you just get that curious person. They're like, wow, I didn't realize that like you could put some grass down in like 2 parking spots. And like, yeah, I've always thought there should be more benches here, right? We tell the story. It also can shame slow-acting governments into acting faster, because governments can act fast for their #1 constituency, cars. And we need to add them to act fast for their actual constituency, people. And so we tell the story in the book of Jonathan Fertig, an activist in Boston. There was a woman named Anita Kerman who was killed riding her bicycle on a bike lane that activists and regular cyclists had known was dangerous for a long time. It was not protected. A truck went into the bike lane and ran her over and killed her. And he, pretty much like within a day, went out, grabbed some traffic cones from a nearby construction site, plopped them down on the kind of painted line of the bike lane, put some flower pots out there that he bought at Home Depot for like $40, because he wanted to make sure that people understood that this wasn't like some random, like, you know, utility project. He had a touch of whimsy and attention, and posted online that he did this. I spent $40 and, you know, 7 traffic cones, and like I did in an hour what DOT has told us it can't do in a year. And he, long story short, shamed the city into upgrading that bike lane. So that's one example. The other example we talk about is the LA Crosswalk Collective that goes out and paints road crosswalks, either in places where people feel like there's danger, or in places where the city has said, we will put one in there, but we have a backlog of like, 70 requests, we'll get to it in 3 years. And they often put them out, and then the city within 24, 48 hours will come back and scrub it out. But they show that the city can act fast when it wants to in service of cars. So I think that those, it's good. It's also, like we said, we talk about One of the goals with the book is to just get people to see that cars are so pervasive, and the way in which society and government and culture is geared towards, sort of like the quote that you read, just like in service of the car. And so tactical urbanism, we talk about in the book, makes the fish see the water. Most people, if you're born in a place like San Diego, just assume that the cars and the freeways are like the sea and the mountains. They were always there, they will always be there. But they were built, and they can be unbuilt or built differently. So I think it's like one of the most valuable tools in the urbanist/activist/concerned citizen toolkit. Yeah. It's like an opportunity to go out and do it, because that's the other thing, is you can get in a lot of trouble. The irony of tactical urbanism, I did some, I've been in some road bike lanes and stuff, and I had an attorney friend say to me, he's like, just be careful, because if someone gets hurt there, you could be on the hook. And it's enraging, because someone can get hurt in the crosswalk that's there legally, or the shitty bike lane that's there, and the city doesn't get in trouble, right? Like, so that's the other thing. Just be careful if you do it. You didn't hear it from me.
Thanks for that, caveat. So we have one last question. Before we do that, I would love to give a quick shout out to the people that made this possible. Yes. Specifically, our board member, Monica Dela Cruz over there. Her, along with Chloe Lauer and then Jason Vance, also from the Bike Coalition. Really made this happen. I mean, we were in a group chat, and they were just like, bam, 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 and I was like, looks good, mate, looks good, mate, looks good, mate. You're gonna MC, sounds good, mate. And so, like, they absolutely killed it, and I just wanted to plug that really quick. Another thing I want to plug is we have another Tithe bowl this time that we're gonna pass around. So if you have any bills, any coins, any gift cards, whatever you got, maybe a nice belt or some rings, put them in the bowl. It will go a long way in helping out the Bike SC and the Bike Coalition to continue to make San Diego more bikeable. We also have QR codes up there. I think it's like that team, but we were ending up with the coalition, we promise. So if you don't have cash, gold, jewelry, whatever, also you can scan the QR code. With that said, one last question here on taking action. So a really great quote you have is that a world built for cars and a culture of car dependency does not work. We don't have to live like this, and we don't have to wait for permission to initiate change. So if there's one takeaway, one action that you'd encourage the people in this room to take tomorrow to move toward life after cars, what would that be?
I think it's call your elected officials or contact them or somehow form a relationship with them, because they do hear from the people, the business owners who are worried about losing parking. It's hard to get people to speak up in favor of a thing that doesn't yet exist, because like I said, the incentives are all messed up. So, you know, find out who your elected official is, the person who is your city supervisor or council member. They have as much of, if not more of an impact on your life than your person in Congress, your senator, or your governor in many ways. So know them. City government's funny, it's like every town is almost like Mayberry in the sense that you can know your local elected officials and be the squeaky wheel. Call them and tell them, I just want to get my kid to school safely. I just want to get to work safely. I would support you if you did that, if you supported these issues. And the second thing I would say, actually, I need to get one more, which is join the advocacy organizations. If you are not a paid member, join. They are a political force and can be an even bigger one with your paid membership.
Yeah, I mean, I said organize, organize, organize before, and absolutely organizing is key, because then obviously the voices join together, calling the city council member en masse, that is that's invaluable. But it helps you to not feel alone. It can feel really lonely, right? Being one of the people who's I think cars are bad. That's a tough thing in any part of the United States of America, much less Southern California, where it's along with the sunshine and the surf, and it's the car, that's part of the deal, right? And to say, like, I don't think that needs to be part of the deal. I don't think it should be part of the deal. That can be a really lonely place to be. So, you know, if you have people in your life who get it, that you can kind of rest when you're with them. You don't have to explain constantly what you're thinking and what your logic is. I think that's really important. But I think you also need to be brave, and you need to talk to people who are going to be skeptical. And this is hard for me personally, and I've like really worked at it, and I've toughened myself up a little bit to where I can really take, I mean, I was at a cocktail party once and I was explaining somewhat reluctantly what I did for a living because I could tell it wasn't going to go well. And the guy says, oh, so you talk about how bad cars are. Do you also talk about all the good things that cars do? I'm like, no, I think that mainstream culture pretty much has that covered. But like, you know, it can be really tough. But having those difficult conversations and using there are opportunities that come up, right? When somebody complains about, God, my commute is just so soul-sucking, and I just wish I didn't have to then, on the weekend, then drive to Target and walk across this acres of parking lot to get to do my shopping. And you can say, like, yeah, it really sucks, doesn't it? You know, like, can you imagine if it were different? Like, there are people who are trying to make
a copy of our book.
Yes, exactly. But like, you know, those can be really uncomfortable conversations. But I think that we're in a time right now, these are dire times. These are really bad times. And like, you know, you can say like, oh, hard times, and that sounds kind of, you know, oh, I could live through hard times. No, hard times are hard. Like, it's hard. It's hard to do this work sometimes. So if you can just be brave occasionally, and you'd be surprised sometimes that people do want to listen to what you have to say. People are open-minded. Like, I was at a thing the other night. I was with a bunch of progressive people in a progressive setting, and I was with some friends, and I gave stickers for the book to somebody, and this woman sitting next to me said, oh, my dad just read that book. And the book had been out for like 2 weeks. I was like, really, your dad read the book? How did he find out about it? And she said, well, I had told him that I was going car-free, and he was worried about me. And so I guess he went on Amazon or something and was like, books about car, we looked at a car, and he bought our book and he read it, and then apparently he went to Goodreads and gave it a 5-star. That like, yeah, people out there, like, it can be hard to get through that, to just pierce that awkward moment, but like, you might find out that you actually can have that conversation with somebody you wouldn't expect to do that, because that's how things change. Yeah.
Give it up for Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for what you're doing and for coming to our beautiful city to speak to all of us.
We will be signing, if you haven't had your book signed, we'll be back with Matthew from Hay Books. And drink.
Bye, drink, socialize, have a good time. Get out of here by 8 p.m. I'll see you at the next one.
Certainly good.
Thank you.